become the world's most populous country officially, overtaking China with almost 3 million more people. The data released today by the United Nations Population Fund has estimated India's population at 1.4286 billion against 1.4257 billion for China. So India has edged ahead. According to the latest data, the United States is a distant third with an estimated population of 340 million. The data reflects information available as of February 2023. However, UN population officials have said it is impossible to specify a particular date where this has happened due to uncertainty over the data. Remember, India's last census was conducted in 2011 and the next one due in 2021 has been delayed due to the pandemic. So the big story is coming in on the population front. Take a look at the numbers. Population clock. Now, 2023, India, as I said, edging ahead, as you can see with those numbers, 1.4286 billion as contrasted to China's 1.4257 billion. How has this worked out? In 1950, India was 357 million, China was 544, well ahead. By 1960, the gap was still substantial. India 446 million, China 654 million. By 1970, India was 558 million, China still well ahead, 823 million. By 1980, India was 697, China 982. This is when China brings in that decade, the one-child policy, and you can see the change. Now India is at 870 million by 1990, China is at 1154 million. In 2000, India is at 1060 million, China at 1264 million. 2010, India has crossed, of course, the billion mark, 1.241, China 1.348. The gap is narrowing. And now in 2023, India has streaked ahead slightly of China, 1.429 billion versus 1.426. And the estimation is at this rate, these population rates, India will be 1.670 billion by 2050. China will be 1.313 billion. So clearly, India now moving well ahead of China. Let's raise the big question. Is this population rise a boon or a bane? Is it reason to celebrate or to worry? Should India be controlling population through legislation, as some have suggested? Just some of the questions I'm going to raise tonight. We're joined by Poonam Muthreja, Executive Director at the Population Foundation of India, Manish Sabarwal, Vice Chairman, Team Lease Services, Udaya Shankar Mishra is a statistician and demographer, and Santosh Mehrotra is development economist. I appreciate all of you joining us, and I'll come to each of you for initial comments, starting with you, Manish Sabarwal. Your first reactions to that initial question I'm posing: is this a boon or bane? Should we be worried today or celebrating?
I mean, it's neither a boon or a bane. It depends on what we do with it. I mean, population, in some sense, we should be proud that democracy panned out, right? China in the 1970s enforced one-child policy practically at gunpoint, and in the next 5 years, it will lose a working age population equal to France. So I'm not sure China will be celebrating their premature aging, which is the consequence of theirs. India, there was an attempt to forcefully control population in the 1970s. So at some level, you know, population control should not be a bulb that goes on or a bulb that goes off. It should be a gentle sunrise and sunset. So at some level, today's us crossing China is a more organic population control. I mean, economic growth, women's rights, and education are the best ways to control population. So I think, is it a boon or a bane? Depends on what we do with it in the next 25 years. But I think it is an accomplishment of democracy that we have not used methods that I think in the long run don't work.
Okay, I'm going to come to more specifics in a moment, Manish. But first, Poonam Muthreja, your initial comments. Should this be a day to celebrate or to worry?
Neither. I would say neither. Let's look at it as an opportunity, but also let's look at it as a situation where India's fertility is declining. We have overtaken China, but 24 states have reached replacement level, which means two children are replacing two parents. That's what I'm referring to as replacement level. And second, India even in the northern parts of India where fertility was high, we've cracked it. Without the big investments in education and health in the north, we have brought down fertility rates in UP as well as Bihar. So I'd like to say that India's fertility is on the, India's stabilizing. It's just that we have a large population which can be seen, which can be converted as a dividend if we seriously work on investing in skills, we work on investing in employability and at good wages. Half the problem is that wages are very low in India. Third, I would like to say that India should be very proud that we have done what we have done in terms of the fertility decline without doing what China did or without coercive measures. And finally, you know, there is a world out there which is today really seeing themselves in economic and demographic trouble because their fertility has gone down enormously and they will not have people to work in their countries, and India will benefit from this large number of young people and we must invest in them.
I'll come to that as well, but Uday Shankar Mishra, as a statistician, demographer, as Poonam Mutreja pointed out, 24 states have reached replacement levels, so effectively 24 states have really got their population numbers under control. But you have two very large states, Bihar in particular, where again there's a decline, but not as substantial in some other states, and Uttar Pradesh. Is this now therefore to be seen not as even the entire population scenario not to be seen as an India crisis, but a more specific Hindi heartland crisis even now?
Yes, Rajdeep, and I would rather term the scenario that you described as the demographic diversity of India, because demographic diversity of India places certain parts of it behind in the transition process and certain parts ahead in the transition process. In fact, this gives us a big benefit in a way, because given the demographic diversity, a region of our country, the southern region, is particularly they are quite ahead. If you look at the southern India, Kerala, Tamil Nadu and other states where replacement level of fertility, we are going below that. So where the workforce actually is putting a pressure, because there is a required workforce for a population to sustain itself, to keep itself productive economically, and that vacuum is perhaps getting filled in by the diversity that we have from other regions of the country. That is one. Second, if you read in recent times, I have actually drafted a very interesting book called Demographic and Development Divide in India. Though I tell it there is a divide which is observable, this divide does not go against the sustainability of population with relation to the kind of expected development trajectory that we are looking forward to. And as rightly my co-panelist Poonam put it, that we need to make this population, rather than celebrating or thinking that's a disaster, I would say this population we must invest in terms of generating capabilities that the global outlook of this workforce should be positive.
You know, you're saying invest in this population. One of the concerns, of course, Manish Sabharwal, is labor participation. Look at China versus India. It's even worse when it comes to women, well up below average for other Asian countries, especially from East Asia. Should that be the focus? How do we get more people in the labor workforce? How do we create more employability, productive employability, not just jobs but productive jobs? Should that be seen as the big challenge? China at 67% versus India at 49% is a substantial gap.
Sure, but they're also much older. So I think absolutely the 3 E's of education, employment and employability are the single agenda for the next 25 years. But obviously, framing this problem in the last 5-10 years, the debate about unemployment has been really a waste of time, because we need higher productivity. Employed poverty is India's problem. So we need to raise the productivity of our states. You know, I live in Karnataka, my parents live in UP, they have the same GDP, but Karnataka does it with 1/4 the number of people. If you think about cities, I mean, Bangalore versus other places. If you think about sectors, 40% of our labor force in agriculture. But I think, land labor capital has never been India's problem. It is how they combine. You could give every Indian household half an acre, they would fit into Haryana and Rajasthan. Capital, we have 50% of India's foreign direct investment since 1947 has come in the last 5 years. So I would say women's labor force participation, we have hit bottom, it is turning. There's massive foreign investment. So if you think about sort of broad indicators of education, employment and employability, we're not where we should be, but there's been massive improvement. So I would say that there's a bunch of luck that India also has, right? The China luck, the factories that refugees who are running away from China, the digitization luck that was accelerated by COVID. And of course, the manufacturing luck, which, we only have 11% of our labor force in manufacturing, which is the same as the US, so the only side is up. So I would say yes, the productivity of our states, cities, sectors and firms and individuals, which is skills as Poonam said, if we focus on that, there's no question that we can become the workshop to the world and the service economy to the world.
Santosh Mehrotra, are you as positive that we could actually use this large population base, this young population, particularly in contrast? I'll put up some numbers which will contrast India's youth population versus that of China. Could we use that, as some suggest, as this great dividend? Or do you believe it's a disaster waiting to happen?
It's a disaster waiting to happen because we have not invested in either the health or the education of our people. Although we have managed to universalize secondary education pretty much, but are we being able to generate the jobs? Well, the economy is not growing fast enough. We might have become, after COVID, the fastest growing large economy in the world, but we've been the second fastest growing large economy in the world for the last 15 years. Fact of the matter is, we have only 15 to 17 years more left in our demographic dividend, after which we will become an aging society. It is a disaster waiting to happen because A, we haven't invested in health and education. This government, despite making a commitment to increasing health expenditure to GDP, it's stuck at 1.3% of GDP. The National Health Policy of 2017 said that by 24-25, we will get to 2.5% of GDP. Have we made any effort in that direction? None at all, despite COVID having intervened. Secondly, we are still spending 2.9% of GDP on education. When we are way behind China, in terms of educational levels or skill levels, as a result of which work and factories which are exiting China are going to Vietnam, Bangladesh and Cambodia. They're not coming to India. Just because we get one windstorm and one apple coming here, we start patting ourselves in the back. So the fact of the matter is, we are going to be an aging society like China became about 8-10 years ago. And by the way, it's a complete mistake for people in India to believe that we should have a national law about how many children to have. China did not reduce its birth rate on account of the one-child policy of 1983. They had managed to reduce their birth rate long before that because they invested in the health and education of their people.
Let me take that particular point, because there is one of the questions we've raised is, should we have a law? The moment this morning the news broke that we've gone ahead of China, typically social media was abuzz saying, we need a law, we need a population control law. Some states have already brought out a draft, Uttar Pradesh being one of them. Poonam Mutreja is someone who represents an organization that looks at these issues. Do you believe that population legislation is required, or are we moving generally in the right direction by focusing on education, and that alone will bring down the numbers, and it's bringing down the numbers across communities importantly?
So, Rajdeep, the last thing India should be doing is any laws or any legislation. You cannot do this to women. Women's bodies cannot be targets for any population, but for any politician. Though this happens all the time in India and many other countries, it makes me angry.
So you don't agree with the Uttar Pradesh law that links it to incentives, create incentives? Okay. Do you believe incentives work?
Incentives are not necessary to look at India's data. In India, the NFHS shows people do not wish to have more than 2 children. The average wanted fertility in India is 1.8. So given that, why do you need to give incentives unless you have a lot of money? Look at the family planning program. We spend 85% of our budget, meager budget, as Santosh said, on sterilization and giving targets. We don't need that. We need to get our priorities right, give a large population of young people spacing methods, and they want family planning, they need contraceptives. The aspirations, one thing I'd like to say to Santosh is, the aspirations of the young woman especially, but all young people are very different. They aspire not only to be educated, but they want to marry late, they want to have fewer children. If that is the reality, where is the need for any incentives? And as far as disincentives go, it is a political statement, Rajdeep, that all these people make. They know the data. They know that Muslim growth is the fastest declining in India. I want to add a positive thing that the government has done, which is they've shown in 146 backward districts which are high fertility with interventions like good family planning services and counseling, they've been able to bring down fertility under this Mission Parivar Vikas.
So
Government knows this better. It's the politicians
so you're
who
saying,
are using
you're saying no need for incentives, disincentives. No, the UP proposed law was that if you wanted a government job, you would have to show that you had 2 children. You're saying no need for any of those incentives, disincentives. You're importantly saying,
floundering.
Okay, and Muslim growth rates, you're saying, are declining now even more than those of other communities. So that's an important fact.
Absolutely.
Santosh Mehrotra, you raised your finger, so I'll let you respond and then I'll come to you there. Yes, Santosh.
Yeah. No, firstly, Poonam is absolutely spot on. We don't need any incentives, we don't need any law. I want to tell you of a survey that was done by the Nandi Foundation in 2018 of 70,000 teenage girls between the ages of 13 and 19 across 20 states. And the question was asked, what age do you want to marry? Please remember, all girls have now gotten education at least until age 16, in other words, class 10. These girls, the legal marriage age is 18 years. 25% said we want to marry between the ages of 18 and 20, and another 51% said we want to marry between the ages of 20 and 25. What does that mean? You don't need a law. Girls already have gotten the education, they want to work, they want to marry late. There is no need for this. What they need is quality health services, quality reproductive health services at the lowest level being provided by primary health centers and sub-centers.
So you're calling for greater investment
need for health.
Sure, you're calling for greater investment in primary health centers as a critical factor rather than this incentives, disincentives. I just want Uday Shankar Mishra as a demographer to just clarify that. Because again on social media, there is this belief that Muslims are the ones responsible for India's high population today. That's the kind of narrative that's spread. You want to clarify that? Is it now clear that across communities in India and even across states, to varying degrees there, population fertility levels are on the decline?
In fact, I would fully agree with Santosh and Poonam on one count, but I must give an explanation to this effect, the myth which goes around fertility decline being different. I would like to emphasize that actually the convergence in fertility decline is significant across not merely the groups that you're talking of in terms of religion or something, any characteristics you take, characteristics convergence in fertility decline is significantly high. In addition to that, I would like to say that the proximate determinants, the attributes that actually help in fertility decline, if we look at the general population, if we look at the majority population, the response on education on fertility decline is perhaps much more higher in the minority group than it is in the other group. So, what I would like to emphasize is that it is not, it's completely unnecessary to engage with a debate of population control law or kind of a regulation to be put in place or incentivizing this process.
Okay, so we've importantly settled that, at least on this show. You don't need a population law. You just need to invest much more in primary health services, in education, particularly for women. But Manish Sabharwal, to come back to something that Professor Malhotra seemed to disagree with you. He's worried that there's a disaster waiting to happen, that in 15 years we're going to be an aging society, and an aging society where increasingly in the age of automation there may be fewer jobs, fewer productive jobs, employment, the soft skills that you need may not be there. Is that a worry that you have, that we will consistently need to grow at 8.5% over the next decade? Productivity growth will need to increase to 6.5 to 7%, and more importantly, education standards will have to rise.
You know, in the 1970s, there was a professor at Stanford, Paul Ehrlich. He wrote a book called The Population Bomb, saying that we won't be able to give healthcare, education, and jobs, so we should have a good famine in India and let 100 million people die. You know, he was wrong for various reasons. And I know, obviously, optimists sound like we're selling you something and pessimists sound like they're protecting you. But I'm quite clear that over the next 25 years, will be very different economically from the last 25. There's a bunch of luck. I'm not saying it's all skill. You know, life is a beauty contest. You don't have to be Noor Jahan. You just have to be less ugly than your competitors. I think there's a bunch of luck and skill and choices that are increasing the economic tempo. It's the best time. As a first-generation entrepreneur, I'm not happy with the regulatory cholesterol that still exists. But it's much less than what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So at least my belief is that this is not a disaster. We can obviously reduce the gap between our aspirations and our reality, but we're doing it. And, you know, at a certain level, democracy, in my mind, was quite clearly responsible for us not doing what China did. So there are fixed costs of democracy in economics, in reforms. I think we have digested them. So I don't believe it's a demographic disaster. And I think the next 25 years will be very different from the last 25 for young people's opportunities, and just as a time to start a company, the capital, the opportunities that are available today to first generation entrepreneurs did not exist 20, 30 or 10 years ago.
Okay, Santosh, you want one final word on that? Manish Sabharwal, much more positive over the next 25 years. Yes, quickly, sir.
Yeah. Well, I think he doesn't work on demography, so let me give you a sense of how rapidly the working age population is rising and how between now and 2030, we will be adding 5 to 8 million new young workers into the labor force. In addition, we have to pull workers out of agriculture. In addition, we have to provide work for unemployed people, and we have to provide work for all the young girls who have gotten educated. And this is going to happen at an accelerating pace. The youth joining the labor force is going to happen at an accelerating pace between now and 2030. And after 2030, it will still be increasing, those in the working age, though it will be at a decelerating pace. The point is, we are not generating jobs at anywhere close to the rate at which we need to now. And the only way we will generate jobs, if we think about labor-intensive manufacturing, and we up the rate of growth from its current 6-7% to at least 8 to 9%. If we don't maintain the 8 to 9% over the next 10 years, we are building up to a disaster.
Okay. You know, in a sense, therefore, these are the two alternative perspectives there over what lies ahead. Let me just get, therefore, final comment, starting with you, Poonam Muthreja. Given what you're hearing, the contrary views, what would you see the scenario 10 years from now? Do you believe 10 years from now we will be in a better space, having virtually reached reproductive levels across Indian states, including UP and Bihar? Are you hopeful of that? Or do you believe the gaps will widen?
Absolutely. I think fertility decline will be at a faster rate in India. That's one. Two, there is going to be opportunities, frankly, both in India and outside India, given the declining population. You'll say there's a brain drain. But Indian government has already signed an agreement, for instance, with Japan, and is talking to other countries about them investing in our development and education. And I think that is the way ahead, because Indians will leave, skilled Indians will leave to go out.
So
Third, I want to say that given the aspirations of the young women, they are going to go for higher education, they are going to go for marrying late, exercising their autonomy. Finally, this is a wake-up call for Government of India.
Okay, you're putting it, when you say that, there will be this aspirational class, Mr. Mishra, Professor Mishra, is there a worry that when we talk of aspirational classes, we forget the vast inequalities that exist income class-wise, that there will be a class that, will continue in a way to lag behind. They may still produce more, and it is the more affluent, the middle class, which is the one which has fewer children. Is there a worry that this widens? Is there any data to show that the poorer you are in India, the more likely you are to produce more children? And could that happen more routinely in the future as well?
Well, I mean, in this regard, I did write a commentary some time back about the inequality implication of low fertility, because the low fertility transition takes place as a kind of transition between the well-off and the poor, being well-off being ahead in the transition, and the poor as like demonstratively follow it. Having said that, I would say I would agree with I would not place myself in this binary of pessimism and optimism regarding what Santosh puts it as, unemployment situation which are threatening. I would not counter that, but I would definitely say that the aspiration level itself is giving rise to unemployment, and we should take note of this aspiration as, in Manish's words, the aspiration with regard to the wage people are expecting, aspiration with regard to the kind of employment, the quality of employment people are expecting. I think these are parameters to be attended to if we want that unemployment figures, as which Santosh warns us about, has to be somewhat optimistically to be looked at.
Manish, final word. Are you worried about income inequalities only widening, given, as I said, the fact that data does suggest poorer, lower income families more inclined to have more children?
I mean, if you threw the 5 richest people in India into the Indian Ocean, India's income inequality would reduce. I don't think it would improve the lot of the poor. I think what India needs is more urbanization, more formalization, more industrialization, more financialization, and more human capital. We are very far from the productivity frontier. The agenda is quite clear. Obviously, there's a difference between the list of ingredients and the recipe, and the magic lies in proportioning and sequencing these reforms. But I think that at least I would bet on India's new tryst with destiny, the new appointment that we're making. I think we'll meet it.
Okay, new tryst with destiny. Nice word to end on. Maybe that is a more positive note. I know it's important to have Professor Mehrotra there giving that word of caution, because we tend to at times only look at life very optimistically. There are good signs in these numbers, and there are continuing concerns also that remain. I appreciate my guests joining us, particularly because you've lived up to what we have a tagline on this show, news without the noise. More importantly, knowledge is what all 4 of you have given us on the show today. I hope we can have many more such knowledgeable debates on critical issues like population. Thank you all very much for joining me on the show tonight.